We are walking in the light of God. We are walking in the light of God.
Welcome to this fourth episode in a series entitled Walking with Pilgrims of Hope. I am Father Ron Will, coming to you from Precious Blood Renewal Center in Liberty, Missouri. As we record this session, Pope Francis died just 2 days ago, and I grieve his death along with you listeners. Pope Francis leaves us a legacy of many impactful statements and actions. One of those impacts is the fact that he declared the year 2025 as a Jubilee Year, with the theme, the Year of Hope. The Jubilee Year is something that the Catholic Church normally celebrates every 25 years. The foundation for these special Jubilee years is found in the book of the prophet Isaiah, chapter 61, where it says, "The Lord has anointed me. He has sent me to bring good news to the afflicted, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, release to the prisoners, to announce a year of favor from the Lord." One of the groups explicitly mentioned in that passage is the imprisoned. In 2018, Pope Francis approved edits to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which would classify the death penalty as inadmissible because it is an attack on the inviolability, the sacredness, and dignity of the person. That's in paragraph 2267. But here in the United States, the death penalty is still on the books in 27 states, plus on the federal level and for the military. Now, there's no denying that many people on death row in this country have committed dreadful crimes, but in reckoning with the reality of those crimes and their victims, we must also reckon with our belief in the sanctity of life. Father Mark Miller has been advocating for alternatives to the death penalty for a number of years, and I have invited him to share with us today how he got involved in this, some of his beliefs, and what motivates him to keep working when so many states still perform the death penalty, including Missouri, where we live. During this Jubilee Year of Hope, where has he experienced hope in his efforts? So, Father Mark, thank you for sharing with us some of your ministries in this whole area. Maybe give our listeners a little background to how you got involved in this effort and what are you doing presently?
Well, beginning when I was pastor of St. James in downtown Kansas City, I became involved with the Western Missouri Coalition Against the Death Penalty. And that was my beginning of actively being involved in trying to bring an end to this archaic form of punishment and of death. When I moved to Texas in the late 1900s and early 2000s, Texas is another state that has kind of high on the list of executions. And so I was involved also with the Texas Coalition Against the Death Penalty down there. And there we established within our parish that each night there was an execution. We would stand along the street with our signs of Stop the Death Penalty, other forms of expressions of life, the reverence for life, the dignity of life. And we would stand there for a half an hour in silence. And then we would go into the church and have a half an hour prayer service. So that was on every night there was an execution. And God knows there were several of those executions in the state of Texas. When I left Texas and came back here to Sedalia, we did not have a collection of people demonstrating against the death penalty, but I remained involved with the Missouri Coalition Against the Death Penalty. And so I've been with them now at the very beginning, up to this time. You know, the death penalty is a strange kind of thing. I mean, it certainly is our President Trump, that one of his first executive orders on the first day was to install back the death penalty on the federal level. That was one of his first day executive orders. We have been trying to bring an end to the death penalty, and not only in Missouri and in all these other states, but also at the federal level. There is some movement. People are beginning to think about the fact that the death penalty, first of all, does not deter death. It is more costly than keeping people in prison life without parole. But for us Christians, and especially as Catholics, it isn't just politics, it isn't just economics, it isn't just even what they might want to call safety in our public arena. Our faith has to say something about why it is that we can still continue that archaic form of punishment. And if we look back over the history of the church, we recognize that our church at one time condoned slavery. You know, at one time saw African Americans and Native Americans not quite as a full human being. And there was a time when we were comfortable with that, for whatever reason. That was certainly before my time and your time. But we are still dealing with racism. We are still dealing with the fact that not all people have the same access to the gifts that we as white people have. And the death penalty is proven to somehow imprison black people and people of color at a greater rate than white people. So there's a racist proponent in this whole death penalty situation. But again, bringing it back to faith, you know, and our faith and our church has constantly been against abortion, which it should be. But the question is, why is it that we are so adamant against abortion, but so often very supportive of the death penalty? We are dealing with human life at both ends of the spectrum. We are dealing with human life with the dignity and the value that we do not place on it. God has put it there. So why is it that somehow we think that one life has greater value than another life? Or do we think that we are able to destroy the value that God has put in us, which makes us more powerful than God? So when we look at God as the creator of all life, we are called to respect the dignity that's been put there from the very beginning. Now, it's true, we need to protect society from those who seem it necessary to inflict pain and harm and suffering. But that doesn't give us the right to take their life. It simply means that we have the right to remove them from society in such a way so that they do not cause further harm. So that's kind of the whole story of my involvement within the death penalty from the beginning up until now.
One of the statements you made reminded me of a button that I picked up, which I think is a powerful statement. Why do we kill people who kill people? To show that killing people is wrong. When I first came across that a few years ago, it's kind of illogical. Why do we kill people who kill people in order to teach people to stop killing? It's kind of contradictory.
Yeah.
And but hope. How do you, the theme of this Jubilee Year and the reason we're doing this series is the hope. When you mentioned Texas, I hear Texas in the news a number of times. I know there's a lot of executions there, and
well, in fact, there's an execution tonight in Texas.
Okay.
At 6 o'clock.
So when you keep hearing these stories about executions going on, how do you react to that?
Well, I mean, the hope comes from the fact that there are fewer executions than there
Okay.
used to be.
So you feel some progress.
Right. And at this time, there are fewer people condemned to death row. So there's not as many on death row today as there had been in the past. So there's hopefulness that either the judges or the our legal system, is not using the death penalty as a deterrent as much as they used to. So that gives us hope.
So you're making progress in your efforts,
Right.
you said.
Right. Yeah.
I heard
Just to give you some, I brought this paper, and this is the death penalty quarterly in April of 2025. So there are still 23 non-death penalty states. So the 23 states that do not have the death penalty. 27 states have the death penalty, but 4 of them have paused executions.
Okay.
They did not rid the state of the death penalty, but they paused it.
Mm-hmm.
There have been 12 executions carried out so far in 2025 across 7 states. And since 1973, when the death row was again initiated in our country, 200 people have been exonerated. So they were on the death row, but because of retrial and appeals, they were found not to be guilty, and so they were exonerated. 200 people that could have been killed.
Yeah, and that's an important thing to raise awareness about. There's a lot of people in death row don't belong there, not guilty.
Well, and another thing we have to remember is it isn't those people at the death row centers in Potosi here in Missouri and other places throughout the country that have the death penalty. It isn't those people who are putting them to death. We, as voters in the state, have given them approval. So they are executing people in our name. It isn't the governor. We've given the governor the right to, somehow pass judgment and to have these executions, or the judges. But it's in our name that they are executing people. And so we have to think about that, sometimes when I ask people, especially if I give talks here in the state of Missouri or in Texas, or it could be in Virginia, I ask people, have you ever been guilty of legal homicide? And of course, nobody raises their hand. And then I ask, are you citizens of this state? And they all raise their hand. And then I say, you're all guilty of legal homicide, because that is what on the death certificate of the death row inmates, after they are executed, the reason for their death is a legal homicide. Now that too is a kind of an oxymoron. How can homicide be legal? But it's done in the name of the state, but it's not done in our name.
That's a good awareness to raise. We're all responsible for those on death row happening.
Yeah, and that's why voting is so important. We vote for people who either do or do not believe in the death penalty. And so if we vote for people who believe in it, that means we simply are continuing to allow the death penalty to be exercised within our state or within our country.
Now, what would you encourage us in between voting sessions? How would you encourage us to raise our voices to people like the governor, legislators, that I don't want this done in my name?
Right. Well, I think we start with our own local legislators, our local people who represent our district.
Okay.
Start with them to give them a call and, ask them where they stand, not just on the death penalty, but all issues of life. So whether it's a death penalty, whether it's abortion, whether it's poverty, whether it's racism, whether it's immigration, these are all issues of life that has a response to whether we believe or don't believe in the value and the dignity inherent in human life. So it's important for us to know what's their position. Now many of them, I know the time when I went down to Jeff City to talk to some of the legislators about this, they bring up all kinds of issues. And one of the main issues they bring up is basically public safety. But we're not talking about whether people should be imprisoned.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about whether people should be put to death. So they want to confuse those two, just as we confuse immigration, as though immigrants and refugees are the same people. That's a totally different way in which our country is to respond to immigrants or refugees. And so even within our own governmental social society, our people want to sometimes put everything in one basket and say it's all the same, except when it comes to seemingly abortion seems to be the highlight. And this is where I also have a conflict with many of our bishops. Many of our bishops don't say much, even though they tacitly have to approve what Pope Francis said about the death penalty. They are not as adamant against the death penalty as they are abortion. They're not as adamant about the immigration system and the breakdown of that as they are about abortion. And I'm saying, do they believe that one value of life is greater than another value? I remember that passage of 1 John chapter 4:20, where it says, whoever loves God but hates their brother or sister is a liar. So how can you love God whom you do not see and hate your brother whom you do see? So you can't do that. 1 John states it very clearly. And yet somehow we have found it comfortable in our life and in our system to somehow deal with, it's okay for us to hate our brother or sister. It's okay to kill some, but not others. And on what basis is that made?
A few days ago, I heard a Kansas judge wrote the death penalty is ineffective and expensive. So that's a glimmer of hope for me. The political system, the judges, at least to some of them, they realize the death penalty is ineffective. That's not stopping crime. And so that's a sense of movement, sense of hope for me.
But see, for us Christians and as Catholics, it's not a matter about politics.
Okay.
It's a matter of faith. Do we apply our faith to these societal issues, or do we simply go along with our political system? Doesn't make any difference what side of the spectrum, whether Republican or Democrat or Libertarian or whatever, independent. Does our faith inform our fundamental belief that human life is sacred and needs to be respected at whatever level? Because we cannot lose the value of our life. It has been placed there by God.
And that's true, but as strong as I believe that, somehow my voice has to be communicated to the legislators because they're the ones going to change the laws.
Right. And so we use whatever we can. For our Catholics, we use the issue of faith. For our legislators, maybe we use the issue of politics or the issue of economics or the issue of bad image, whatever works. So whatever works, and whatever is going to appeal to the person we're talking to. So we need to be informed on the different levels so that, if they say, well, I'm not a man of faith. Well, okay, but are you a man of economics? Do you care that it costs more to kill a person than to life in prison?
But for me, I have sometimes written people in legislature that you are my representative, and my voice says, I want you to vote against this. Somehow I think we have a responsibility to communicate with our public officials that we elect and say, you're acting on my behalf. This is what I want you to do.
Right. And they will respond many times if it's saying, but I also get these other letters. And so it's a question then of, okay, where are you coming from?
Okay.
Somehow they have to balance what they're hearing from their constituents with what they believe internally. And this is always a difficult thing because at times it seems to me that they have to somehow compromise their own value system in order to look like as though they are appealing to their constituents. So the value of life, is really the important issue in all these issues.
So the starting point for us as listeners and viewers is our faith, the teachings of Jesus, and the value that he taught us to have for all human beings, that we're all beloved sons and daughters of God. And that's a strong belief in my mind, but a lot of people have trouble believing that. Not everybody. Maybe I'm beloved by God. Certainly not this guy or woman.
Yeah.
But we are, just to raise that awareness.
Well, it's the scriptures from where we begin. In Genesis, God created human life. Okay. God created all of us, so we share in that creative moment when God placed God's Spirit within us. We also have our Catholic social teaching that continues to remind us that not only human life, but all of life. Of course, Pope Francis, choosing the name of Francis, wanted to emphasize that we are even responsible for the creative world. How do we take care of our air and water, all of that, so that next generations can breathe freely and drink healthy water and all the rest. I think it was Albert Schweitzer, a long time ago, a scientist, said that once we lose respect for any part of life, we begin to lose respect for all of life. So the question is, when did this begin? And people say, well, even in the Old Testament, God was kind of a vengeful God. But I remind them to go back and read the story of Cain and Abel in chapter 3 of Genesis. Cain certainly was guilty of premeditated murder. He was not drunk when he killed his brother Abel. He was not in a fit of anger that just started. He went individually and personally and was committed to end his brother's life because he felt he was getting the raw end of the deal. So if anybody deserved a death penalty in a premeditated murder, it was Cain. But did God give him the death penalty? No. God put a sign on him, Scripture says, so that no one else would kill him. So even in the Old Testament, God did not believe in the death penalty. God put a sign on Cain to preserve his life. Yeah, he was cast out of the garden, cast out of society, and I don't know where he went to live, but he was removed, for the safety of others. But God did not kill him.
Another part of what I heard you saying was this is a strong individual belief, but when I had joined another group of people who also believe like me, that keeps kind of energizing you to keep advocating for alternatives. So maybe just share a thought with our viewers of where could they look for, or how could they get involved in support groups?
Well, I think every state has some type of a group at the local level or regional level who are against the death penalty. So I would call your local city or county and to see if they have any. Just recently we celebrated the 20th anniversary or the 25th of the bombing in Oklahoma City.
Oh.
That was on June 19th, 1995 is when that happened. Actually, it's the same day as when I was elected provincial, so we don't know if there's a correlation there. But anyway, Bud Welch lost his daughter, Julie, in that bombing. And Bud Welch now is advocating the end of the death penalty. He does not want the death penalty to be applied to those, and certainly Tim McVeigh did an awful thing of killing over 100 people, including children. So when you hear parents who lost children And they do not want the death penalty. I mean, he literally went to bat for Tim McVeigh, not to kill him. Because he said it doesn't bring closure. It says it doesn't bring my daughter back. It doesn't take away the pain of my losing Julie. It doesn't do any of that. It simply makes another family suffer the loss of their son or the loss of their daughter by execution. So we are expanding now the families that are being hurt through our execution under the name that somehow we're trying to bring closure to this one family or this one group of people. But we're creating this, it's like throwing a rock in the lake. You don't just cause one little circle of eruption, it expands out.
That's a good awareness. That it does not bring closure. Sometimes we use that argument that this person should be killed for the awful thing they did. It satisfies the family who lost their loved one. But it doesn't really give satisfaction. It doesn't heal or their hurt.
Yeah. See, and now some states are giving the one to be executed a choice. How do you want to be killed? You can be killed by a gun. We can bring back the firing squad. You can be killed with this, cocktail that we're going to insert in your veins. Causes a little pain. It takes a while, but they'll get the job done. Or you can use the electric chair. Well, some people now are choosing the firing squad. Just recently, somebody in Virginia saw, because he thought that would be quicker.
Wow.
So they bring in 3 guns, and hand them to the individuals. And then I heard they are told to aim for the heart. So how would you like to die? I mean, that's the choice we give people.
Wow. It's an awful emotional thing, isn't it? Yeah. Well, I'm going to kind of draw this to a close and just ask you, is there any last thoughts that you'd like to make sure that our listeners would know and carry away from this beginning conversation?
Well, again, it all depends where you are at the present time. And if there are reasons that you believe there's value to the death penalty, I would just invite you to check up on it. Get their whole story. Don't just listen to the news or what you may have heard or what you remember from the past. We all grow. We're all called to become more involved, more educated, more informed. So I would say that's where you start. Look at where you are. And then to bring in your faith and our Catholic social teaching to say what informs our decisions, our behaviors, our belief, and how do we apply all of that then to our whatever situation. It isn't just the death penalty, it's all of life. How do we apply that then? And, how did we become comfortable in saying that it's okay to kill this part of life, but it's not okay to kill that part of life? How do we make those decisions? Because the value of life is not self-given. It's given from above. And so that's what we carry with us at all times. And that's one of the values also of why it's so important to call people by name. It respects their humanity. It acknowledges that they are a brother or sister. And so, how do we show that?
Well, very good. Thank you for your sharing. And just to put this conversation in the context again of 2025 being the Jubilee year that was declared by Pope Francis focusing on hope, he asks, what is the Christian response to a world of ill omens and uncertainty? And Pope Francis begins that by quoting from St. Paul's letter to the Romans in chapter 5, verse 5, Hope does not disappoint. And Pope Francis doesn't mean that as a nice cliche or a fervorino. Hope does not disappoint means there's a practical selection of particular acts and initiatives that can help us answer two questions. Where can that hope be found? And how and where can we draw strength from it and share it with others? So I invite you listeners today to get involved with learning about groups in your own part of the country that are advocating against the death penalty. Pray about how is God wishing you to become involved in such advocacy. Thank you, Father Mark, for having this conversation with us and sharing with some of your beliefs and your passion. Thank you for being a pilgrim of hope and inspiring me and hopefully inspiring our viewers. And I invite our viewers, please join me again next month as we continue this series as we travel with another Pilgrim of Hope. May God bless you.
We are walking, we are walking, we are walking in the light of God. We are walking, we are walking, we